All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. If you are a regular visitor to our Aplos monthly Aplos webinar, I'm Dan Kimball, and we're going to get going here. It's 10 o'clock, and we always like to try to start right on time. I'm super excited about today's webinar, which we're going to get into in a minute. Just so I'm sure you all know from our promoting that we have a special guest, Joan Garry. Joan, you can say hello, and I'm going to introduce you in a minute.
All righty. Hi, everyone.
Good. So we're going to do a couple housekeeping items, and then we're going to get started. So just as usual, can you just a couple of you just put in the question bar that you can hear my voice and you can see my screen. We're not going to run a lot of slides, but we do have some Q&A with Joan, and I'm going to kind of run those questions along. Good. You can see and hear. That's wonderful. Great. And so as always, here at Aplos, we do a monthly webinar that we like to share with you guys. Of course, I'm Dan Kimball. I host this monthly webinar as part of our Aplos fundraising sessions. Once a month, we get together and people log on, and we do a series of fundraising topics, leadership topics, nonprofits, all those fun things that you guys do 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. So we're glad you're here. If you're a first time attender of our webinar, we'd like to welcome you. We record all of our webinars, and we make those available on our Aplos Academy website, aplos.com. You can go to Academy, and you can find this webinar. At the end of today, you'll find past webinars, lots of content. You do not have to be an Aplos user to use that. So we're super excited you're here. We have a lot of fun, a lot of great questions. You see, again, a little bit about myself. I'm a past fundraiser that is now helping Aplos develop software. Just a little bit about us. Again, Aplos software, we do accounting software for nonprofits, and we also are in the final stages of releasing our brand new donor management software. So if that's an area that you're looking for some help in, certainly look us up, but that's not the main reason we're here. But just know we're out there. We love nonprofit work. We love nonprofit workers, and we're so glad you're here. So without further ado, we got an exciting day. I'm personally very, very excited about today's guest. A couple of months ago, I reached out to Joan. Joan and I have just met today for the first time. So, Joan, I'd like to welcome you to an Aplos webinar.
Thank you very much. I'm actually really happy to be here.
Good. So Joan Garry, as you can see on the slide, those of you who are watching in, Joan really is known as the Dear Abby of nonprofit leadership. Joan writes a blog, a regular blog for nonprofit readers. She's got a great website at joangarry.com. We're going to post her info at the very end of the webinar. I have personally been reading and kind of following Joan for several years, even back when I was doing fundraising, and I just find Joan, your blog, your articles just to be just wonderful. So welcome, and we're glad you're here all the way from the East Coast. So
yeah, it's great. It's actually great to be here.
Good. Well, why don't we just kind of get going? This is really just a great opportunity for us and for you as listeners to really kind of pick up some nuggets. So really to get things going, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey, Joan, into the world of nonprofit leadership and fundraising? Because you've got a fascinating story. So tell us a little bit about your story into nonprofit fundraising and leadership.
So I began my career as part of the management team that launched MTV in 1981. Lucky me, it was just as cool as you can possibly imagine. I learned just a whole lot about startups. And when I fast forward, I think everyone on this call will agree that startups and nonprofits have a very, very similar gestalt, right? People are working super, super hard, super, super fast. They have sort of often under-resourced, real sort of passionate about what they're doing.
Sure.
Now, saving the world is totally different from putting music videos on television. Let's be clear. But I what's interesting, I think, actually about my story is that while I was in my corporate life, I was concurrently my wife and I were sort of early pioneers in the world of gay and lesbian people having kids, and we filed a suit in the state of New Jersey, and I became the first person in the state of New Jersey to legally adopt my partner's biological kids. And regardless of your politics, the moral of the story for me was, oh my goodness, one person really can make a difference. And so I decided that it would be really interesting to take a leap over into the nonprofit space. And an organization called GLAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, was looking for an executive director, and it seemed like a natural fit because its mission was really about ensuring fair and accurate representation of the LGBT community in the media. And so it's kind of had this kind of really good fit for me. The place where it didn't have any fit at all was that I had no nonprofit experience, and I had never asked a soul for money before. And arrived to an organization that was a mess. The board didn't realize it was a mess. It was in financial disarray. We had 18 staff members. Payroll was coming up in like 3 weeks.
Wow.
And I didn't have enough money for it. So that's actually how I found my way to the nonprofit space.
Okay. And the reason I asked that question on the forefront is that, probably like myself, most people would say they probably did not get up one day and said, oh, I want to be a fundraiser. So it's always fascinating to hear how a variety of people get into the field. And so I think it's a great introduction, and probably represents a lot of the people who are doing nonprofit work, which is, they had a passion for something, they believed in something, they had a personal story, and boom, all of a sudden they're running these nonprofits. So with that, you do nonprofit work, you raise money, you have some success. I think 15 to 20 years in your bio, and then boom, you decide to become a fundraising leadership coach. Why did you decide to do that?
Well, I would say that what I really am is a nonprofit leadership consultant, and really working with kind of nonprofit leaders. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about board and staff. And I do everything from strategy work to working with CEOs of nonprofits to kind of serve as their strategic advisors. I work with boards to help them think about fundraising differently. But I'm very, very sort of evangelical about doing whatever I can to make leaders as effective as possible in the pursuit of their mission. And I decided to do it because I felt like I clearly loved my tenure at GLAD, and I was by every metric pretty successful. But I felt like I had a unique mix of experience that I thought would be valuable. And I also, there's so many different causes, whether it's schools or hospitals or illness-based organizations, or you name it. And I thought maybe I could just sort of kind of spread the love a little bit.
Good. Well, I want to tell you, you do a wonderful job. If you guys that are listening, have not checked out Joan's website, joangarry.com, and it's not to necessarily over promote Joan, but I got to tell you from a user standpoint, from a fundraising person that worked in nonprofit, I find your articles just to be, not only very practical, but they're fun, they're funny. I think you have some great wisdom, some great stories, kind of easy to chew on. And what I really appreciate is a lot of your perspective comes, because of the 1.5 million nonprofits out there, in the country, we all know that the majority of them are small shops, and we're going to kind of talk at that in that a little bit. And by the way, if you are active on Twitter and social media, we do have kind of an engaged webinar community. Of course, my Twitter handle is @FugitiveDMK, FUGATIVE DMK. You can hashtag us at #Aplos webinar. And Joan is very active on Twitter, which is really fun to see her articles out there. And she's at at Joan Garry. Her last name is Garry. So tap into that. So thinking about the nonprofit space and the leadership, what would you say, Joan, has changed in the past 15 to 20 years? What trends? What have you seen change from when you went into this crazy field called nonprofit work to what you're doing now?
So I think there are a few things that have changed over time, and then I think we have what has happened in the last year in the world of fundraising and leadership. So maybe we take them one at a time. So when I arrived in the nonprofit space in the late 1990s, cell phones were a lot larger than they are now. Although actually, if you see the iPhone 7S, it's quite a beast. But but technology did not play nearly the kind of role that it plays today.
Great point.
And I think that it doesn't play. It did not play any significant, a marginal role. Your website was basically a storefront, right? Yeah. And if you were trying to engage people online, it was pretty primitive. And I think that what's changed is everyone has learned that there is this is an extraordinary asset for engaging people, inviting people to want to know more and to do more. I don't know that everyone really has capitalized on what that engine and that tool can really provide, but I think that's a big issue. I think the other thing that I would say, and I want to talk about, I think young people, and statistics and studies bear this out, are quite engaged in sort of being good citizens. And I think that the millennials, 20s, 30-year-olds are a generation that is much, much more interested in sort of this business of changing the world. And I believe that's something that's really, really changed. What I think is about to change, which is one of the reasons that I feel really kind of nearly evangelical about the work that I do, is that there is this impending leadership void. Is you have many, and the statistics are crazy, baby boomers who are retiring as executive directors. And I do not believe the sector has done nearly enough to build a really, really strong pipeline. And so part of what I do with my blog, my podcast, and my book is really trying to engage people at many levels of organizations to recognize that, stepping up and stepping into leadership roles is really, really going to be important for the future of the sector.
That's a really great point. I've over the years been to a lot of fundraising conferences, the AFP, Association of Fundraising Professionals Conference. Kind of you get a lot of kind of what I would call old school, the donor pyramid kind of folks. Yep. And then you go to N10 and you have exactly that. You have a lot of younger people, a lot of our listeners who are on, who do our webinar are kind of represent that younger who are literally trying to change the world. So that's a great point and good to think about as we move forward. So Joan, in a number of your past articles and really in your current book, you talk about nonprofits and boards, nonprofit boards as sometimes being messy. I love that term. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and kind of where you came up with that?
Sure, and it was sort of the switch from the for-profit sector to the not-for-profit sector that made me realize that the basic design of a nonprofit is so different, and that it actually is messy. So my equation is that is if you take overworked, often underpaid folks, right? You then add to that volunteers who get paid nothing and are often very, very hard to wrangle. You would then add to that a whole nother group of volunteers called your board, and they are your bosses, but they already have day jobs, and they're supposed to give and go find lots of money for you. So you take those three elements and then you add a big fat dollop of intense passion.
Yeah.
And you have this recipe that I call messy. Now, there are some people who say, well, that's not really fair, Joan. Messy is kind of a pejorative, right? And I recently talked with this guy, Tim Harford, who's written a book called Messy, The Power of Disorder to Transform Lives. And messy, actually, to me, ended up being sort of could be an asset and a liability. An asset in the sense that messy can lead to innovation. It can lead to creativity. When everybody's voice is at the table, when everybody wants to be heard or needs to be heard or comes expecting to be heard, that's messy. But you can generate some really interesting ideas there. And then my final thought here is that because nonprofits are hardwired in this sort of messy way, that unless you manage them well and lead them well, they can really go off the rails.
Yeah. Great point. Great. So a lot of the folks that we interact with.
I have a picture of me up here.
Yeah, I like that. We work long and hard. You have a great staff, by the way. They send us up to date current pictures. So
actually, you're missing the streaks of gray. Actually,
well,
and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Photoshop. Photoshop. You were talking about technology. So a lot of our folks that either use Aplos or come to our webinars represent small shops. And I personally have a passion for small shops. I've worked in big shops, so I understand the benefits of having, a large marketing budget or being able to travel or, even having 5 development offers. But it's those small shops that really, I think, struggle in this space. So what advice can you give folks that are maybe from small shops and don't have the resources that some of these large organizations have?
So one of the things I'm super passionate about, and this comes from having been a nonprofit fundraising virgin when I arrived at GLAAD, is the power of storytelling. And I know you asked, I have a question for me about that as well.
Great. Go ahead.
I wanted to tee it up here because there's 2 things I want to say about fundraising and staffing. One is the best single piece of advice I can give you about fundraising in a small organization is to build and sustain a culture of storytelling in your organization. One of the things I find most often with boards of any size, of any sized organization, is they'll say, the ED does a very good job of explaining what XYZ organization does, but, I'm not that good at it. Like, I don't know. I'm not close enough to it. I feel ill-equipped. Well, my argument is that it is the obligation of the staff and the board to work together to make opportunities available where board members not only are hearing those good stories that they can then tell at a cocktail party, whether it's a fundraiser for your organization or someplace else, but that these stories become part of their DNA as they move forward through the organization. And I believe, quite frankly, that staff members need to be excellent storytellers as well at all levels, not just the executive director. I have this story about working with an organization that had a legal support team for folks who had trouble finding housing, and they were really struggling. The staff was really struggling because they were dropping administrative balls, leaving checks on copy machines. And we brought the group together, and we started to talk about what's the story behind this check. Right?
Yeah.
Who is this person? Who is Bob Smith that this check got lost and that person almost missed a month's worth of rent, right? Right. But if you can bring the work to life, that is the main and essential part of fundraising. Because my argument is if you take a credible messenger like a staff member or a board member, and they tell a compelling story about the organization, why it matters, and brings it to life for someone, you will get a new stakeholder. That could be a donor, it could be a new board member, a new staff member. So credible messenger plus great story equals new stakeholder.
Great.
Staffing. One last thing about staffing.
Yeah, we're great.
Yeah. One last thing about staffing. Oftentimes, small organizations finally get to that point where, yes, we can finally hire a development person. And everybody puts all their eggs right in her basket.
Yeah.
And I've written a blog post that's called "Before You Fire Your Development Director."
I've seen that. Yeah. Yeah.
And the premise of it is that a development person, regardless of talent, skill, etc., is a quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
And until your organization, it's possible that the addition of a development person can be this catalyst, but you need a catalyst to get the board and the staff to understand that it's a shared responsibility to raise money, and that the development director isn't going to do that for you. They are, in fact, the quarterback of the team.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of my development colleagues say that people expect them to be the rainmakers, to come in and, just like you said, we've got a development person now, so where's the money, and exactly that. So going back real quick on the storytelling, I know we have another question here in a little bit, but I thought it took something out of your book that you said the difference between a mission statement versus a story versus an elevator pitch. And I think that was great. So I don't know if you want to expand on that at all, but I thought that was a really good way to kind of, break out the three.
Yeah. And this, by the way, and I am telling you, this is the big obstacle with board members. They will tell you that they don't know what to say when they talk to somebody about the organization. They feel like not an imposter, but they feel, relative to staff, very ill-equipped. And so I've seen people at cocktail parties say, "Oh, you need to meet our executive director. She's fabulous. Come on over and meet her." And then there's this big long line of people to talk to the executive director, half of whom don't get to talk to the executive director. Yeah. And the board member is just basically teeing up these people to go talk to somebody else.
Sure.
So that's one thing. The second thing is mission statements are, in and of themselves, generally pretty useless. And I say that with a bit provocatively.
Sure.
But usually they are, painstakingly wordsmithed by boards over endless number of hours.
Yeah.
And what that does is it squeezes the juice out of it. Mm-hmm. So an elevator pitch. So you might have so never memorize the mission statement and ask your board to say it in the lobby, because it always sounds like the Boy Scout pledge or something. So you want to put in your own words, we're an organization that, in a sentence. Then you get in the elevator and you got 2 minutes, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to just tell somebody about the organization. And one of the great tricks is to ask somebody a question. Either something like this: "Can I just tell you a quick story? I'm on the board of this organization. I just learned this the other day. Can I just tell you a quick story?" People don't say no to that. You think people are going to say no? They never say no, right? Right. And so if your story can wrap in impact and urgency, and has a real person with a real name and a real story, or if it has to be sort of a sort of an archetype or something like that for privacy reasons, you can in 2 minutes you can make at the end of that, what you want to get to a point is you want to practice, and that's why it requires practice. In 2 minutes or so, right? What you want to do again is ask a question at the end, which is to say, "Would you like to know some more?" Yeah. Again, people aren't going to say no.
Yeah. And what I love about that and that advice is I think anybody can tell a story, right? I mean, you don't have to, you don't have to have a lot of expertise per se. I mean, like you say, you have to practice it, but anybody can say, "Hey, I want to tell you a story I heard about something I care about." So I think that's so practical.
I think but I think the red flag is that most people have these jobs because they love them. They're really passionate about them. And Dan, I don't know if you have kids, but I've got 3 kids. And if you asked me to tell you about one of my kids, I wouldn't know where to start, and I probably wouldn't know where to end.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you'd be thinking, okay, I just really wanted to know how old she was and whether she has a job,
Yeah.
And the answer is 27 and yes. And And so it is remarkable to me how difficult this task is for staff and board members, because they love their organization so much. They want to tell you everything, and everything is too much.
Yeah. Good point. Really good point. We have a question from Trevor. Trevor, we are going to do some Q&A at the end. So I've noted this question, and we're going to come back to it, but it's an excellent question that we'll get into. So with that, we did some kind of general questions. Now let's get into a little bit about something that I think Joan is probably really excited about, which is your book. So if you do or don't know, and as we were promoting this webinar, we talked a little about Joan's new book that actually just came out in March. Joan Garry's guide
last week.
Yeah, and I actually read it last week. I got it. I downloaded it on Amazon on Kindle. That's kind of my preference. But gosh, I got to tell you, it's a wonderful, wonderful book. I mean, again, myself as a fundraiser, I found it easy to read in a good way. I highlighted the heck out of it. Real quick, why did you decide to write the book? Because I can't imagine it was to make a lot of money.
Anybody who decides they want to make a lot of money should do almost anything but write a book.
Yeah, because I know some people who've written. I believe it or not, I met the humorist Dave Barry last week in Fresno, and we talked a little bit about writing. And he says he's not making millions doing that. So why did you write the book, and what did you learn in doing so?
So here are I guess I have 4 reasons I wrote the book. One is that I felt that there was or maybe it's really, I guess it's 4. I looked to see if there was a gap. I didn't want to write something that was already out there. And the thing that I saw that was missing was a book that spoke to both board and staff leaders at the same time. Because I believe in the power of shared leadership in nonprofits, and that board chairs and executive directors need to behave more like co-pilots than boss and employee.
Yeah.
And so I did not think that there was anything out there for board leaders that really empowered them and was a shot in the arm to them that they could do this, and gave them the tools. The second thing is that I found that there were chapters there was topics that were not covered in other books. 2 in particular, one you pointed out, Dan, which was the chapter about storytelling. And the second one is a chapter that I've written on crisis management. And in a world that is increasingly polarized and angry, my current statement is that if you have not had a crisis yet, it's not because you're good, it's probably because you're lucky. And getting out in front of that is something that nonprofits, usually, and if it's a cause-related thing on either side of the aisle, there are opponents, and that causes trouble.
Yeah.
The third thing was really that I just felt like that all the resources out there were very clinical, very instructive, and there's not a position on the nonprofit field I haven't played. So I've been a donor, I've been a board member, I've been a corporate sponsor, I've been an executive director, and so I've played all the positions on the field, and I come to the book with an authenticity that I think is different from what's out there. And the last thing you made a point of is that I have a sense of humor, and with the exception of my friend Vu Lee, who writes Nonprofit with Balls, who I think is hilarious. There's not a lot of humor out there, and I think it diffuses stress.
Yeah.
And I also think it points to what I consider to be the joy that comes with getting paid to make a difference.
Gosh, I cannot disagree with that anymore. I mean, that is, the fun part of that, which is, the old joke of we put the fun in fundraising and all of that. But I find sometimes some of my, God bless them, my fundraising and colleagues out there, lighten up, people. I mean, if you can't laugh at your own mistakes. In fact, I wrote a blog not too long about just kind of about owning your mistakes and just kind of laughing about it a little bit. So I think those are
I think the most popular blog I have written since I started my blog was called My Biggest Professional Mistake. My most successful podcast, which I did over the over the winter break with my wife. I said, I have to do a podcast podcast. What should we talk about?
Yeah.
And she said, well, I'm a terrible board member. Why don't you interview a terrible board member? And Confessions of a Terrible Board Member,
That's great.
The hottest podcast I've done.
That's great.
People love to learn. They love that sort of authenticity of mistakes and the sort of fun that comes with that, and the sheepishness, the humor, and the object lessons.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple things, we're obviously my encouragement for those who are listening is buy the book. It's easy to get. It's a great book, but I'm going to ask you a few questions, things that I kind of pulled out that I think kind of might help this group. So you talk a little about in the book about kind of that balancing that feel good emotional side of nonprofit work with the business side. For me, that kind of struck home a little bit because there's always this rub. You get these high powered business on your board, but nonprofit is not. It's a business, but it's not. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, or articulate?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I talk about quite often is the notion that what separates the good nonprofits from the great nonprofits, what separates the good leaders from the outstanding leaders, is the joy that emanates from them, recognizing the sort of the real privilege that comes with doing the work as either a chair of a board or as an executive director. And so when you think about the emotional side of nonprofit work, you think about frankly, the draining, oh goodness, we're dealing with kids with, pediatric cancer, or we're dealing with, immigrants, being deported, or we're dealing with, whatever those issues are, feeding the hungry. And it can be really stressful and draining. And so it's this the emotions of being in a nonprofit space are both very inspiring and draining at the same time. And that's why you'll see a lot of people like Beth Cantor writing about self-care and those sorts of things. And that's why I feel so strongly about storytelling, because the storytelling isn't just for to equip your board members, but it's also to inspire them and to remind them, hey, it's not just about the P&L and did we hit our numbers. This is about real people, and the more you can bring that to life, the more. I mean, certainly every board member should be financially literate about how the organization is doing. But it's got to be that mix, because if you sit there and have monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly board meetings that is all about the business of your organization, you will never get your board to fundraise. Great. Never, ever, ever.
Yeah. If I may, a quote that I highlighted out of your book was, your mission statement is your North Star. Excuse me. The big thing that matters the most. Your role as a leader is to keep the organization focused on it, even when you're deciding about the centerpiece for the gala. I love that. And the reason I love that is because I personally got in a little bit of hot water once as a fundraiser, because I worked at the Children's Hospital here in our community, and right. I was in a meeting one day, and there was a 45-minute discussion about the color of napkins for the upcoming gala, and I lost it. and I raised my hand in the meeting, and I said, I asked the question. I said, there are currently 212 kids in beds in the hospital today. Do you think that they give? And I think I might have used an expletive word. And
I hope you did.
And I did. And I said, do you think they give a blank about the color of your napkins? And I think that was a great reminder of our role, and just kind of keep it focused, people.
I think you're right, Dan, and I think that's how actually in my podcast with my wife, yes, she has certain kinds of attributes that don't make her the best board member, but at the same time, her description of boards she has served on, they spend a lot of time talking about the color of the napkins. Yeah. And you will lose really good people that way, and you'll lose them fast. And you will lose them forever, and they will tell 10 other people.
Yeah. So you already talked about storytelling, and
Yep.
it's a big deal. Obviously, we talked about that. So you have a great section in your book about that. You want to talk a little bit more about storytelling?
Well,
I
I want to
guess.
make sure that if there are folks that have other questions, I want to make sure that they get in. So you want to just,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, it might come up again in the questions, but
Okay. Okay.
I think
Yeah.
I've really talked about why
Yeah.
I feel like that's really super
Yeah,
important.
and it's a pretty big deal because there's a lot of articles and people are writing about that. So yeah, so let's move on with that. So what advice would you have for nonprofit leaders who are about building a better board? Because I found your chapter about relationship with boards and building boards to be, I think, really helpful. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So the first thing people, it's interesting that people don't do this often enough, is actually sit down, board chair, executive director, maybe the development director if you're large enough to have one, and actually go through your board list one by one by one. Assess your current board members. People say, "Oh my God, I hate my board. They're so horrible." Well, they're not all horrible. Right,
Yeah.
they're not. I
Yeah.
guarantee you. And divide them into thirds. Rock stars, so those are your A's. B's are the people who will do something if you ask. And C's are people that you would really, if you were on a bus, you'd like them to get off at the next stop.
And the bus to keep go.
Right. And so the first thing to do is do that and see how you come up. And if you come up roughly in thirds in each of those buckets, and I'm talking about leadership, I'm talking about influence on the board, I'm talking about their ability to, do they bring an interesting sphere of influence? Do they have wealth adjacency? Do they have a large, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah.
If you find that you have a third in each of those buckets, your board isn't actually as bad as you think. That's what I call a grade B board. So that's first. The second thing is that you don't have to completely transform your board. You only have to tip it. So what I mean here is that a few board members can make a very big difference, right? If you can bring on a couple of board members who share the vision for what the organization is, where it should go, and are enthusiastic and are actually ready to be at the table and proud to be at the table, you can actually tip the board. And you can in fact, some of your dead weight, the C category folks, will self-select off, and it will raise the bar for the B-level players, and you'll end up with some of your Bs moving to As. So tipping the board with a couple of really good people who understand they are part of the solution. Recruit them and say, we are transforming our board. It is not perfect. Come help us make it great.
And I think in your book, sorry, go ahead.
No, and then the last thing I just want to say is because this is, any of your fundraisers on this call will know this, that if folks are not passionate about the mission, you're in big trouble because, as fundraisers generally know, these board members' passion for the mission has to be greater than their fear of asking for money.
Yeah. And by the way, just for those who are listening, I think we might have mentioned in some of our promotion, we're actually going to give away 2 of your books to 2 lucky winners who are participating in today's webinar. So stick on to the end, and then our marketing expert here, Megan's going to draw 2 names, and Joan, I believe, is going to sign those books, and we're going to have them sent to you. So yeah. So I think one of your folks helped us set up. So thank you, Ed, for that. So moving on a little bit more. So let's say I'm a new leader of a nonprofit, and I've read a couple of Joan Garry's wonderful articles, either on her blog, and I've determined very quickly that I've inherited a mess. Where should I start?
Know your numbers cold. Right? Is you have to start with understanding the magnitude of the mess from the business standpoint, right? So what are my numbers? How in arrear, if it is a mess, what's my accounts payable look like? What's my cash flow? What's the run rate for the organization? Whether you are a finance person or not, it doesn't matter. You just need to get it and know it. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think the second thing is this kind of assessment, like looking at if you're lucky enough to have some staff, find your rock stars, find the people that can. There's a guy who talks about 3 categories of people: navigators, survivors, and victims in a organizational setting where there's a need for change. And if you've inherited a mess, you're in the change business, right? And so you want to really assess who's with you, who's going to embrace change, who's going to resist it, and sort of start to build build an alliance with the folks that are really embracing the fact that changes are going to be need to be made. Yeah. And then the last thing I'd say is just, build a good story about where you want to take the organization, so that when people are writing you a check, they're not writing it to you because you've just told them the payroll is due tomorrow and you can't hit it. You've actually said, here's where I want to take this organization. And yes, I have inherited a mess, but if you can invest with me now, together we can get here.
Great. And last month I did a webinar. We talked a little bit about the old SWOT analysis and kind of, how that it can apply, the whole look at your strengths, your opportunities, your threats, that kind of stuff. And I find that to still be an effective tool as well for nonprofit leaders. So I don't know.
Oh, I'll be in Washington with a client all day, and that's one of the homework assignments that the participants had ahead of time, is just to sort of tackle some of that independently, and then I've brought it together.
Yeah. All right. So this next topic, which you talk about in your book, is one of my favorites because I've spent so much time in fundraising. I love fundraising. I'm one of those rare birds that, for whatever reason, I kind of fell into it and just kind of turned in love with it. But for some people, the word fundraising makes them want to run and hide. So with that, I'm an executive director. I'm a nonprofit leader. I love my mission and the work. But the word fundraising makes me want to run and hide. What advice would you give, or tips or suggestions to get going?
So, here I was arriving. I had to fundraise, and I had to fundraise boldly and aggressively and urgently. And my development director at the time, who actually didn't want me to get hired because she knew I had no fundraising experience, and she's a character in my book actually, and said to me, "Hey, Joan, I just want you to know that it makes people feel really good to give money to causes they care about." And most executive directors tend to be pretty high on the pleaser spectrum. And so that was really all that I needed. The second thing that I've been talking about a lot lately, and this is a good exercise to do with your board, ask them, if any of them have kids, if their kids have ever done any fundraising for their school or for a cause in their community. How do they feel about their kids' efforts to raise money? And get them to think about that and throw out words that come to their minds. And you're going to hear words like pride, right? You're going to hear words like noble, right? You're going to hear all these like really juicy, wonderful words. And then you just let them sit. Let those words just sit in the room. Right?
Yeah.
And what would your kids say about you if you scored a $10,000 gift for your organization? Wouldn't they feel exactly the same way?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. You say that fundraising is an art and a science. That means you will make mistakes. It also means that people will say no. Can you tell us a kind of a story of your experience there?
You mean like a mistake I've made?
Or when somebody said no, and kind of how you rebounded in terms of fundraising,
Actually, my favorite mistake story, it was a mistake that turned into a win, is I was at my very first fundraiser, and I'm very organized, and I'm very, prepared, and I have an index card in my pocket of my suit. and I folded it, and I'm working the room, and I go and I find this couple that I know that I'm supposed to, I know that there should be $2,500 donors, and that they're lapsed. So I know that they loved the organization at one point. So I'm talking to them, and I always realize that one member of the couple is staring at my pocket, and finally I can't take it anymore, and so I said to her, I said, "Are you reading my pocket?" She said, "Yes, I am." And I looked down, and I've folded the card outwards instead of inwards, and it says like Bob and Mary should be $2,500 donors. I'm like walking around wearing, a damn badge.
Yeah.
And I said, "So what are you reading on my card?" And she says, "Bob and Mary should be $2,500 donors." And I thought, gee, I could crawl into a hole, except this is a really nice apartment, and I don't think they have any holes here. And you know what happened is that Bob and Mary were so impressed that I had done my homework that they became $2,500 donors.
Yeah.
So, just being authentic, being, being yourself, and recognizing, I'm a big baseball fan, and if you get 3 yeses out of 10, you're going to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, that's 333, isn't that right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's great analogy. Good. Well, thank you, Joan. Why don't we've got some folks who've asked some questions. So if it's okay with you, I do want to say here after the Q&A, I'll provide the link, but one more time, it's joangarry.com. I think all the information of your book is right on your website. You can go to Amazon.
It is. There's also a separate book website where you can download a free chapter as well, and sort of learn a little bit about the contents. And that's actually also easy to remember. That's nonprofitsaremessy.com. Okay. You can get to it from the homepage of my regular website, but it's also there's just a separate website that kind of talks gives you a little bit more of a sell on the book.
Cool. In fact, I'm gonna kind of have that slide up while we're doing some Q&A, if that's okay. So if you've got a few minutes, we'll.
That's what you look like.
Yeah, not bad.
No, quite fine.
Well, thank you. So Trevor has a question. He says, we are a startup 501c4 of a group of indigenous people called the Garifuna from Central America, and I'm sorry if I did not say that right. And we are being persecuted by the government of Honduras, and we are in the process of working on self-determination and have no resources to even pay our 501c4 off. Any advice? That's a tough one.
Boy, it is. So typically, someone will start either a 501c3 or a 501c4 with, a couple of people, one of whom has, some capacity, so that you have some kind of an angel that's helping to get you started. I think that I might try to find somebody who can get you on social media quickly and see if you can crowdsource some money. The problem with that, the good, there's many good things about a C4, but one of the challenges is that the money that is donated is not tax deductible. So, but I would, I would try to spread the word. This is where, when you first get started, relying on the kindness of friends of yours that have skills and attributes that you can't afford to hire can make all the difference in the world. And you don't need a big donor. But if you can get somebody pro bono to help you kind of enter the world of social media and do some online fundraising, that would be, I think that would be probably my best piece of advice. Okay.
And Trevor, if you want to email me at my email's here on the slide. We have a couple of our Aplos clients who do work in other parts of the world, and we might be able to kind of link you up and do it that way too. So. And
thank you, Trevor, for what you're doing down there.
Yeah, great point. We have Debbie who said, could you talk a little bit about turning one-time donors into recurring donors?
Yeah, that is all about cultivation and stewardship, right, Debbie? And there's actually Dan will tell you I wrote there's a kind of a remarkable story I tell in the book about cultivation and stewardship and how it led to a ridiculous gift.
It was a great story, by the way. I don't want to give away the book, but it's
no, don't give it away. Don't give it away.
Yeah.
But all I can tell you is if you read the book, you will never think about the triangle toilet paper in hotel rooms ever again the same way. And this is where I think board members actually can really play a very active role. People can say, well, I don't know people of wealth and my sphere of influence is limited. So go ahead and give them a portfolio of 10 donors, right? But during the course of the year, they should have X number of touch points with that donor. And it could be via email or phone, right? And that's why stories are important. They might want to email a story or a victory or a win or something that came up that's really bad for your organization, right? And so this is where I think people drop the ball with boards, is that I think it actually engages people if they feel like, well, I have a little tribe of donors that are mine to cultivate and steward, and then give them the credit for the renewal or even the upgrade if it comes to that. So, people think they have to have like big cultivation events or, a stewardship cocktail party for their donors. You don't need that. You just need to be in touch with them. Make sure that your systems are good enough that if somebody gives online and they give $25, that they get hurt, they hear from you as quickly as possible, that you get on they get on your email list, that they're immediately connected to you, and then assign them to somebody.
Yeah. And I would, if I can add to that, I would say that also don't focus on the money, but on the relationship. That's the big theme here with Aplos. And I mean, and there's some great folks out there. Mary McLean, a couple others who write great blogs about little things you can do. Like, for example, when you send a thank you letter, don't send a reply envelope. Just making those donors feel welcome and just know who they are, kinds of things. So, and by the way, make sure you thank them.
I'm a huge fan too. I've written a blog post about this, about the power of the handwritten thank you note. And one year I refused to send coffee mugs to our donors because I thought I would just like plots if I had one more coffee mug myself. And I decided to write handwritten notes to every one of our donors above a certain level. And it was painstaking and horrible. But the same day, another colleague organization, their coffee mugs arrived and my handwritten notes arrived. And I got so many emails from people saying, I needed another coffee mug like I needed a hole in the head, but I can't believe that you actually remembered the name of my dog.
Yeah, great point. Let me see. We have Francis who asks, are there any nonprofits that act like for-profits? They care more about money than their mission. They use their nonprofit status to avoid taxes. Probably. Should these nonprofits otherwise be identified and shut down? So that's an interesting question.
Well, yes, I think that there are definite. Well, I think boards, back to your earlier point, Dan, is that boards who actually think of it as a business think that the object of the game is to collect the most toys, right? Right. And that means the bigger, we want our numbers to grow every year. We want our revenue numbers to grow every year. And that's actually not the metric for success. I have, $60 million budget clients who are not as impactful as $250,000 clients. So it's not about the size of your budget. But there are organizations that think like businesses in this regard. As for shutting down organizations that are problematic, it's a funny thing, having been on both sides of the aisle here. You run a lousy nonprofit. If a lousy for-profit business, it goes out of business, but a lousy nonprofit can live forever.
That's true. Yeah, it really can. Yeah. When you've had a sleep, this is from Adair, I think I said this right. When you've had a sleeping board, what is a great tip to wake them up? They're passionate, but tends to get really redundant at our meetings. And I'm sure the passion is there somewhere. I'm sure it is too, Adair.
There's I don't know how, I've forgotten how this works, but at my book website, nonprofitsaремessy.com, if you order the book, I don't know if it's a pre-order bonus or not. I'm afraid to say that I don't remember, but I'm going to do a video called a series of videos called A Guide to a Great Board Meeting. So I'll give you two quick tips. Bring the clients to life in the boardroom somehow, right? Right. If it's direct service or if it's advocacy, it doesn't matter whether it's direct service or not. But bring them into the room. Figure out a way to to make me leave with a goosebump. Bring in somebody enrich me. Bring somebody in from the sector to educate me about the trends in the sector in which I am. I may be a sleepy board member, but I joined the board. I made this commitment, and so enrich me. So I have I'm big on equations, even though I'm not that great in math, but, a board meeting or a board retreat, if you want to ignite your board members, and you're talking about sleeping ones, so you want to wake them up, inspire, enrich, engage. Ask them their opinion, give them the opportunity to learn something they wouldn't have learned otherwise if they weren't on your board, and tell them a story that gives them goosebumps.
Good. We have time for a couple more. I want to be sensitive to Joan's time and all your time because I'm sure some of you have some things to do this afternoon. You've had mentioned that you found millennials are interested in change and are willing to volunteer. This is a great question. We have had difficult time recruiting young adults. Any ideas? That's from Martin.
Without knowing what efforts you've made, it's a little bit hard. But it's you've got to reach them you got to reach people where they are, right? So, what do you have Instagram going? Are you using the tools and are you where they are, right? I've worked with clients who have, sent me these videos. Do you think this video will go viral? And I'm like, to your mother, maybe, and her bridge club friends, but really, so, the best way to engage people, and Dan, I'm sure knows this too, the best way to engage people is just to ask their opinions. So, go get a bunch of, even if it's like, the young adult kids of your staff members or board members, like invite them. Free food always will bring people to you, right? So come have pizza with us and help us think about how our message can resonate for people in their 20s. People are always really, really interested in offering their opinions. And when, you offer, and when you're asked, that's a way of getting invested as well.
Yeah, and I think volunteerism is a great thing. A lot of communities have these. They're called young leadership networks. Most communities have them, and so you might even have one of your own staff become part of that. Also, there's a new trend called 40 under 40, where the communities will identify 40 people under the age of 40 who are up and coming. So I would just say engage in your community, get out there, hit some service clubs and hang out in some bars if you have to, and just find out where the young people are and find out what they're interested in. Ask them would be my.
But remember, right. But remember, it's just sort of like, it's like it's just a different version of diversity issues, right? Is that you've got to, a 50-something person isn't going to reach a young person as easily as a young person who says, I'm invested in this organization and here's why, and you should be too. So, it's about tipping, right? You don't need an army of young people. You just need a couple of people to build an army.
Good point. Yeah. And I think so we'll have one more question. There's a couple questions we won't be able to get to. I'm going to say that if you'd like to just take those questions and email me, my email is right here on the slide. I'd be happy to answer those following the webinar just for sake of time. We have Suzanne who asked, what is the best way to handle a donor that has called to end the regular donation so that we can maintain a relationship? Did that make questions? Yeah.
So they've called to say, I don't want to give anymore.
Yeah.
Depends why,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it is completely legit to say, can we just have a brief conversation so I can understand your rationale? Because your feedback to me is critical. You've been someone who's invested in this organization, and what you think and feel about it is really, really important to me. You might find that the person lost their job. Your knee-jerk reaction is, oh, we did something to make them angry. And that's so about you, and it's so not about them, right? And, so it might be that they're angry. And I have to tell you, angry donors are really interesting. They're not easy, but an angry donor is a donor who cares a lot about your organization. Yeah, I mean, unless they're like complete, sort of like Miss Piggy divas or something. But for the most part, angry donors are passionate about your organization, and you can get them back if you can sort of get to the heart of the matter and begin a slow and steady recultivate.
Great. Good. Well, Joan Garry, thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure to have you. Joan Garry's Guide to Nonprofit Leadership, because nonprofits are messy. We have the website right here. We will link this website to the Aplos website. You can go there. You can Google it. There is just a tremendous amount of resource out there. And we are so grateful, and we will be sending a follow-up email. We record these webinars, and we'll be letting 2 lucky people know we'll be getting one of your books. So, Joan, good luck with the book, and I want to personally thank you for being such a great resource to the nonprofit workers out there. You really are a great asset to all of us. So, Joan, thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And I'd just really like to say to the people who are on the webinar this afternoon, it's always funny. I always feel like I have a brown paper bag over my head. I can't really see anybody. But I can visualize that there are a lot of people here on this call today who actually could have been doing something else and made time to invest in some professional development, and that's what leadership looks like. So thank you very much for taking time out to listen to me spiel.
Good. Well, hope you all have a great day, and you can check our website for our next webinar. We have some more special guests coming up in the next couple of months, and so with that, have a great day, and best of luck in your leadership and fundraising. So, Joan, thank you, and thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Okay.